Ja bih najavio onda Gorana Livazovića, on je sljedeći. Gorice, tu si, jel da?
Gdje sam, hvala. Evo samo da prebacim prezentaciju, može?
Može.
Pa samo molim ako vidite, je li sve u redu, jel se vidi prezentacija?
Sve u redu.
Dobro, hvala. Poštovane dame i gospodo, profesori, kolegice i kolege, ja ću ovo predavanje održati na engleskom jeziku kako je bilo dogovoreno. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's nice to see you all. Thank you for a very enthusiastic first half of this presentation. I am going to be talking about Anton Makarenko today. So this topic is out of law. It's not really related to law, but it has some law implications because it is legally important throughout the history of the 20th century. I will shortly present Anton Makarenko and his educational work. He is a famous Ukrainian, Soviet, and Russian pedagogue, educator, who lived from 1888 until 1939 and had an experience in theoretical and practical education, who has done a lot for education and pedagogy in worldwide terms. Makarenko's outstanding educational work at the Gorsky colony from 1920 to 28 and the Dzerzhinsky commune from 1927 to 1935 likewise cannot be dissociated from the activities during the 1920s of schools and other educational establishments headed by very eminent and talented teachers such as Sachki, Pistrak, Pogremnitsky, and Rosinsky. So the originality of Makarenko's work and educational ideas actually started along his creative path in the company of other educationists who had affirmed in theory and in practice the idea of a unified education. So this is the period between the 19th and the 20th century, which actually gave birth to a lot of alternative educational ideas throughout Europe and the world. Some of them are probably familiar to you all. The pedagogy and educational system of Maria Montessori, the Summerhill educational system, Jena Plan, Dalton Plan, the creative school of Celestine Freinet, and other educators that at that time began implementing new, original, fresh ideas. Among the problems of socialist education, which Makarenko's theories exercise an important influence, were the relationships between education and politics, because young people are always under the influence and in danger of being politically instrumentalized, between education and other sciences, because this is the area of the individualization of education and pedagogy, the logic of educational theory, the essence of education, and the relationship between educational theory and practice. It should be noted that Makarenko's work is actually famous because he worked with populations that were underprivileged, homeless. He worked with delinquent children. So these were not easy children to work with. He began working in institutional surroundings, creating a role of education as a lifestyle in which he tried to connect real life situations, real life experiences with various educational activities and experiences that children had to live through, had to work through, and had to actually learn about and learn through their everyday life in these communes, in these homes, in these institutions he developed for these underprivileged, very often deprived, socially deprived and educationally deprived children. Makarenko's ideas emphasized the relationship between education and other disciplines, and he had a credo which was famous even today: make as many demands as possible on a man and at the same time show him as much respect as possible. Even though he was criticized for this dyad that was related to the demand-respect relation, he himself pointed out that from a genuinely humanitarian point of view, respect for and demands on a person were not separate categories or attitudes, but were dialectically related facets of an individual, invisible whole. The uniqueness of Makarenko's pedagogy, which is famous even today, even though in the West or in the Western countries and Western traditions, Makarenko's name is not mentioned very often, is that he considered education to be a process that is social in the broadest sense. With all the highly complex world of ambient activity, the child enters an infinite number of relationships, each one of which he can constantly develop, interweave with other relationships, and is compounded by the child's own physical and moral growth. So he criticized pedocentrism and the underestimation of the educational role of the teacher and the children's collective as one of the prerequisites for an emerging personality and own activity of the child. A basis for an educational law, he wrote, should be provided by the induction of total experience. So he tried to correlate educational activities, work, learning with everyday situations and problem solving for children who were underprivileged, who had delinquent lifestyles, who had problem behavior present in their everyday lives. In educational research, as in any other area, the experience he wanted to impose on these children was arising from deductive conclusions, which are significant well beyond the initial instant of experience and remain guiding principles throughout. So he considered these prime experiences that children were learning and living through as stepstones for their further development and later life. The unity of a child's life and education that was actually promoted by Makarenko's educational ideas and his educational philosophy is that the chief educator of man is life itself. And this fundamentally materialistic notion served as a basis for the principle of conformity to nature in teaching and education, which can be seen in prior works from Jan Komensky, Johann Pestalozzi, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, or let's say Friedrich Diesterweg. So it stands to Makarenko's credit alone that he actually established a system of education built upon the educationally effective organization of the entire life of the pupils. So a way of life and education. In that way, he could ensure the maximum development of each individual inside the group and the most positive influences the group can have or the collective can have on an individual as a social surrounding. His principle of organization education actually was very influential for a number of educational systems throughout the world, because Makarenko urged that there should be no waiting for life itself to yield its fruit spontaneously in the form of the other people necessary to society, but the only instruction and work are actually relevant for the life of a young person, and this should be integral for his further later development. So this idea found a clear practical application in the life of his pupils, because they were actually, as John Dewey says it in America, a little prior to him in the Soviet Union, Ukraine, in Russia, Makarenko also established this learning by doing principle, in which he presented various activities, various ideas, various positive models to children from which they could learn and implement these new information inside their own lives. So the educational collective, which is integral for Makarenko's educational systems, is actually a way of helping, supporting individuals inside the group. He examined such aspects of the educational collective as unity of external and internal relations, and actually found that these kinds of relations and types of activities were typical of a democratic society. So what he promoted inside his educational system was actually democracy, equality, and participation for all pupils. Makarenko emphasized the unity of teaching methods as well. So he played a pioneering part with his idea of studying children in the process of being educated. So not only did he consider education to be a transformative process, he also acknowledged new ideas about humans and children in this process as a process of transformation, rather than a person who is stable and cannot be actually changed. So it would be wrong to make out that Makarenko regarded the collective as a mere instrument of mass education. He considered the unity of education through collective and individual action as a distinctive feature of his educational system. He actually attached definite importance to intra-collective association and intra-collective relations in the formation of the pupil's personality. This was the distinctive mechanism which enabled processing information arriving from the outside, and also a model through which an individual pupil could actually learn and think critically about certain information, certain activities, certain models of behavior he was actually witnessing. There was critique of Makarenko's pedagogy that actually the costs of education were met out of profits from the pupil's productive work, but this was a necessary prerequisite. So the pupil was going through this transformation through work. And even today, children that demonstrate delinquent behavior or problem behavior are most easily and most efficiently treated and most efficiently re-socialized through working through work activities. So the fact that the pupils in the Gorky or the Gorsky colony and the Zhinsky colony and commune did 4 hours of productive work per day was regarded by Makarenko as a measure that was necessary by the particular difficulties these children actually had. So he considered that the amount of time allotted for labor should not be out of proportion to the amount of time children or his pupils spent on studying, learning, sports, art, games, and social activities, but this also had an important economic background. So to wrap things up and finalize my presentation, Makarenko, Anton Semyonovich Makarenko is very important because he actually tried to democratize the educational process. He established a general assembly of colony members, so his pupils, which became the supreme collective organ of self-government, giving practically every colony member, every pupil, every student a hand in organizing the manifold affairs of the collective. He also had organizations, he also had groups consisting of composite ad hoc groups of pupils who were set to perform specific items of social useful work, which enabled their transformation, which enabled them to return to a pro-social developmental path, because these were children who were criminals, robbers, rapists, and all other kinds of delinquent individuals. And it actually institutionalized an elective body that tried to minimize individual privileges between its members, because leaders of these small groups were actually elected in a way that those who were passive, who were marginalized, who were not so active, were actually selected to be the leaders of certain groups so as to integrate them into the community. My last slide is related to the creative application of Makarenko's ideas even today. We know that his ideas are alive and well in a number of educational systems and a number of educational institutions, especially those who are dealing with problem behavior children, problem behavior individuals, delinquent children. And we can see that his ideas are very much alive and are running in a number of schools and educational systems throughout the world, because they have impacted the development of self-government in students or in pupils, the cultivation of traditions of collective life in school as a social surroundings, the unity of learning, labor, social, aesthetic, and sporting activities of pupils inside and out of the school and in clubs at the place of residence. And we can see these examples throughout the world. So not only in the eastern parts of the world, but also in the western parts of the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mi is nagyon szépen köszönjük, Goran.